we've been going through quite the process, between dissolving the reality and kind of coming up with some different, like, symbolic meanings or metaphors for what we feel is kind of something that's going on. Oh, we were talking last night about the juxtaposition of the realities. So as we all kind of know that there's, duality in this perceived matrix or reality, divine feminine, divine masculine, there's the polarities between space and matter, even though really when we look at these things, even though they are like a juxtaposition right now, and that's kind of what's creating our conscious experience of it, but when we actually look at it, we see that it's really a spectrum. So it's like consciousness and the mind, and kind of like bringing them together.
Sometimes this is known as like, some people call it like the Helios Gamos, or like the alchemical wedding is another name for it. Some people called it like the birth of the solar body, or the being Christed. So this is like the juxtaposition, basically, when these two different angles that create a cross when they come together, and basically the polarity, quote unquote, between matter and spirit merge into one.
Right. And like if we just look at human design, for example, in Earth, when you look at it, it's showing that there's actually, like, what creates the juxtaposition of the reality, or what they call the Maya, the illusion, is the time. There's actually a time difference, and we're kind of experiencing two separate timelines at once.
Kind of like a time lag, almost.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, one of the calculations in human design, which is like when you take your first breath, and this is the personality or the mind aspect, the conscious,
like the birth chart in astrology.
Right, and that's like the awareness, right? And that's taken at the time of your birth. And then the other calculation is the design calculation, or the form, and that's actually taken from 88 days before you were born, which in astrology, if we just take a look at what's happening every 88 days, is Mercury is going retrograde, and Mercury is taking its time around the sun. So it's kind of interesting. Mercury is also known as like the messenger of the gods. It's also the mind. So we kind of started to put together, like, what's really going on? Why is there this like juxtaposition? And it creates a cross, like the crucifixion, the cross, X marks the spot. And it's kind of what's giving us this experience in the reality. And when we looked at, the human design stuff, we were trying to figure out, well, what's going on with this 88 days, thing. And we were like, oh, maybe it's Mercury.
Yeah, that was kind of like our first clue. We were like, oh, well, Mercury has something to do with, Mercury's revolution around the sun is 88 days. We're like, well, that's really interesting that the design is 88 days before the birth, right? And, you don't see anything about this in the human design, so this was just kind of like this intuitive theory that we had.
Well, a lot of human design, they're not really like teaching
astrology,
even though that's a major component. So if you know more about, the actual planets and their movements, you might be able to come to like some of these conclusions. But then you were coming up with like Mercury's also like Anubis.
Exactly. It's Anubis. It's also Sabak in the Cometan system. In the physiology of this, if you look into the ancient Cometan, like the Metu Neter, you have it attributed to the Bronson and Wernicke centers in the brain. So this is like the inner voice, right? Which is also why Anubis has to do with the dog star, like the language, right? This is the inner voice. And then if you look into it even a bit deeper, the Anubis is the one that's like ferrying the boatman across the sea of the dead, basically, as someone dies, right? And then so you take this even a little bit further, and then you have essentially what's going on is like this is how we're impregnating the feminine aspect of consciousness within ourselves, like when we go into trance, right? So we have the words, or the inner speech center, and then when we go into these deep forms of meditation, or the dream world, or the world of death even, we take these ideas, and then we impregnate them into the form consciousness. And then we intuited just a bit further in Mercury, right, in alchemy and Gnosticism, is the sperm aspect, right? This is the Mercurial aspect of the reality. So then we went even a little bit deeper with that, and we were like, oh, so that's really interesting. It's like Mercury, right, like the seaman, of course, the seaman, the ferry boatman, you have that again, is traveling this river into the egg, right? Or the form, again, the feminine aspect of the reality. And
it's interesting too, because like you always hear this, like, oh, the veil is about to lift, or the veil is gonna drop, or like even the same with like the electromagnetic field of the sun, you know, and it's about to change, and like the solar storms, and you know, the pole shifts and all these different things. Like, it's kind of symbolic to what happens when an egg, you know, of a woman is going to receive a sperm, you know, the sperm that gets in. And we found out that, or we're kind of figuring out that like the juxtaposition of the reality is similar to maybe, you know, what the sperm is going through as it's like making its way. It's like struggling, it's like trying to figure it out. And the one that gets in though is when the field goes down.
right.
And then it, you know, then it comes back in, and like they say, the egg actually chooses the sperm. So I don't know, we were kind of figuring out that it's not about like trying, you know, for consciousness, like trying to get there, trying to figure it out, all this stuff, that it's just about like really allowing it to happen. And that's what's, you know, maybe what's going on right now. Like Mercury just went into shadow 2 days ago.
For retrograde.
Right. And we're about to we're like going into these eclipses with Leo, which is, you know, Leo's process is identity formation. You know, so could we be at the stage as like a collective for humanity, that we're at the point where like the veil is dropping, where meaning like the collective being is becoming impregnated, and that's, you know, with the Mercurial aspect of it, so it's like communication and like consciousness, you know, coming together. And is that how we're all gonna like, because if you think about it, like the juxtaposition is kind of like the two beings, right? They're not quite lined up. So maybe like in the womb or whatever, you know, you have the sperm and the egg, and they first like kind of go together.
The spirit and the matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, over time it starts to multiply all these cells. It's like all the people, all these different cells start to come together until you have the emergent behavior where the governor, like the governor of the body that controls the currents, which is the mind. You know, right now we have it as the mind, the nucleus centered, you know, competitive type situation. And then the emergent behavior is where we're going to take this consciousness out to the membrane of each cell. And then, because all of a sudden, from the juxtaposition of the being, from being totally separate, all these different consciousnesses, it then is maybe going to line up.
Exactly.
You know?
It's like there was this delay, right? So this 88-day period, this is like, if we look into the physiology, right, we've actually figured out that the other centers within the body, the other nerve centers, such as like the sexual nerve center or the solar plexus nerve center, are actually faster than the mind center in their response to the environment. This is why like feelings come before thoughts, right? So this, having the mind be the decision maker and having this perceived experience of separation between matter and spirit or whatever, is like this 88-day delay. And this is why you have this kind of like impregnation going on, where we think we experience all these things, or we think about these things, and maybe we have dreams about them, and then there's this delay that we're experiencing where things are actually happening later, where we're not making the connection between them because this delay is so long.
Right. And it's all perfect though, because we're figuring out, like, oh, the juxtaposition, yes, it's like kind of confusing, like we feel limited, and it's because two things are coming together. You know, like the creation is happening. You know, we are in the womb, we are collectively the sperm and the womb, and what happens then, the being, like, is going to emerge, you know, and come forward from that. And maybe the juxtaposition was exactly perfect because it allowed us to align, you know, perfectly.
Exactly.
With the womb, with the spirit, you know, to be able to emerge into the next, whatever it is.
Yeah, and on that note, like a couple more synchronicities, right? So there are upcoming eclipse, right? Has to do with the lunar nodes, of course, as well. So the lunar nodes, they call these the head and the tail of the dragon. Okay, this is the north node is the head of the dragon, the south node is the tail of the dragon, right? So this is really, one way to look at it would be like the sperm, right? This is the dragon. Another way to be interpreting that would be actually the DNA or the rainbow serpent, the serpent of light, the feathered serpent. And then the other really interesting thing too, right, if you look into a lot of these different astrology predictions as well, we just recently entered the Mayan day out of time.
Yeah, like 2 days ago.
Like 2 days ago, and this is going to be a period where we're kind of in this, it's like this in-between state, right, where, you know, you look into predictions or interpretations like the Leo King saying all the doors are open right now.
Yeah, before Saturn forced the concrete at the end of the year when it moves into Capricorn, you know, for a long cycle.
I think another interesting correlation we made too is like, right, so the egg, okay, you have almost like the earth, right? And imagine all of the individual, quote unquote, beings on the earth being like these sperm surrounding the egg. These individual consciousnesses, which really in reality are all from one being, right? So the Father releases this, and then all of these seemingly separate beings compete to impregnate this one egg. But when really, and in the end, it's all just consciousness. And so imagine it as thus that as soon as that one sperm makes it through, or in some cases two, right, we have, or, you know, even a couple in like, what do you call it?
Twins.
Like in a twin
like
situation.
Twin flames.
Yeah, like twin flames. But then we have consciousness itself, the consciousness like shared from the father figure. Imagine that all of these sperms collectively just really have one consciousness. And then as this one sperm gets in, all of the sperm's consciousness experience getting through. And this is like the alchemical marriage, or the juxtapositions coming into alignment.
Right. And, you know, as you were saying that, I was just kind of thinking, like, you know, we don't really even know right now with the technology that we have, like, what's really going on energetically between the sperm and the egg. Because the sperm, you know, has to go, and, like, they say, like, oh, you know, there's a lot of them, most of them don't make it. The environment is very hostile, you know, all these things. But, you know, what if what's really happening is energetically, you know, the egg is kind of like calling for the consciousness of all the sperms to come together, but like through one.
All the personalities, all the egos.
It's like coming into one. Still only going to be exchanging the DNA with that one, but it's like kind of interesting. Because I don't feel like it's like overall competing to like
exactly,
you know, penetrate. I don't feel like it's like that, because we're dealing with something that's, you know, much bigger on a fractal level.
Right. And then on a practical level with all of this, right, the way that we're kind of intuiting all this is because we've been doing this kind of experiment, right, where when you align with your actual human design, then what you're doing is you're basically going into a mode of like responsiveness, or aligning with the form principle. Rather than having the mind make decisions, you're tuning into your authority. So what this really was is like basically that juxtaposition, like coming back into alignment, rather than there being this delay on the reality, everything just becomes a present, moment to moment experience where you're tuning into the collective consciousness,
into your hologram,
into your hologram, into
your
the collective lucid dream, right? And then you had an interesting another revelation about like the design crystal, rather than like the sperms. You were saying like basically that another way to look at it would be, you know, possibly that the egg has already been impregnated, right?
Oh, like we're collectively at the stage.
Exactly.
Like we're all collectively this being, because basically in human design, what they say is that 88 days before you're born, the design crystal like comes in, okay, and that's like the, I guess kind of like it's the form, which is interesting because we're in Leo right now. Like, so if we're at this stage at a collective for humanity, and we're at this stage for this being, identity formation,
that's Leo,
you know, and it's like, okay, and then what happens after that? Well, you know, then you're like almost gonna be born soon, you know what I mean? You're kind of at this stage where it's like, all right, and maybe at that point when it's the design crystal, that it's kind of like the consciousness that we have now, you know. You know, and it's interesting too because we're lined up with the galactic center right now. Mm-hmm. So like the galactic center is really like the cosmic womb. You know, there's a lot of speculation, and a lot of astrologers are really intrigued by what's happening, that, you know, so many things are aligning with this galactic center. You know, and that's kind of also what happened with like 2012, and like, you know, we're kind of like hovering around the womb.
When a lot of people too
or the birth canal.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people
hole.
too have been saying like, okay, we're about to have like a merging of timelines, or a split of the timelines, that we're in this window of a certain portal, right? And so this is an kind of more organic interpretation, you know, a kind of holistic cosmology of sorts that kind of wraps all this stuff together in a way where we can observe nature and say, okay, well, you know, this is how nature kind of works. You know, how is this kind of chunk up? How does this scale up to what's going on a planetary level right now?
Right. And like with that, we've been really contemplating the fact of reclaiming your power and your energy. You know, like bringing it back in, so that you're like whole within yourself, because that's again the fractal level, which I think is what's helping the collective being emerge. You know, because we're not putting external gods outside of us. Because even when we talk about these type of things and metaphors, it's really just to help us, you know, have a deeper meaning and understanding, and to work with the energy that's happening. You know, that's what astrology and human design and, you know, the I Ching and these type of symbolic light languages do. It's helping us to process energy, because that's what our vehicles are here to do.
Exactly.
So we've really been contemplating the fact of like reclaiming your power, you know. So this has to do with like riding the energy currents. And so we don't put gods outside of us. We also don't put like demons outside of us, or archons, or, you know, archangels, which again are the angles, and these different illusions of the Maya, or the juxtaposition that were in place to, you know, put that pressure and tension thing. When you get to this point, it's like you are creating everything, and I think that's what the being that collectively, you know,
is being birthed.
Right. It's realizing that it is the creator, because it's all one. You know? Yeah,
the co-creator. It's like we've been saying, it's like the divine feminine, or the you know, the great mother, or whatever you want to call it. It's like wish to have like a child / counterpart, right? And in this creation of a co-creator, or even really many simultaneous co-creators, if you're looking at this like a hologram of sorts, all of these situations basically have been created to point us back at our co-creatorship, at our, you know, the fact that we're basically becoming lucid within the dream, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think it was interesting too. Our friend Betsy was saying, like, you know, when you put your intentions, you know, like think of that word. It's like intention. you know, and that's kind of like what the juxtaposition is. So like
Mhm.
when you put your intention, you're like trying to influence or like
Impregnate.
with the mind first. You know, it's like I am intending to, you know, whatever, and then it, you know, hopefully will influence the hologram to produce some sort of experience you want to have. Yeah, I think that was mostly all that.
Hope you enjoyed.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.